I was the ruthless king of the Chicago syndicate, feared by all, yet secretly haunted by a medical truth that rendered him airless. No woman wanted a barren, cold-blooded killer. Until a desperate, fat single mother knocked on his fortress door, sparking a twisted arrangement that changed everything. Vincent Rossi was not a man who commanded respect. He extracted it from the marrow of his enemies, but was known on the icy streets of Chicago as a cruel, unforgiving phantom. The 34-year-old syndicate boss ruled his empire with a velvet-gloved iron fist. Yet behind the sprawling marble walls of his Lake Forest estate, Vincent harbored a devastating secret. 5 years ago, a brutal warehouse shootout had left him bleeding out on cold concrete. The surgeons saved his life, but the trauma to his lower abdomen left him permanently, irreversibly sterile. In the traditional bloodline-obsessed world of the Italian-American Mafia, a boss who could not produce an heir was viewed as a dead end, a king sitting on a crumbling throne. Whispers of his condition had leaked through the sterile walls of the private hospital. The elite Mafia princesses, women bred to forge alliances through marriage and childbirth, treated Vincent like a pariah. They smiled at his galas, drank his expensive champagne, but refused his courtships. Marrying the Iron Butcher was dangerous enough. Marrying a cruel man who could not even offer the security of a blood heir was a sacrifice no ambitious Mafia family was willing to make. Vincent grew colder, harder, and more isolated. He leaned into his reputation for cruelty, deciding that if he could not be loved or carried on through legacy, he would be universally feared. He surrounded himself with loyal soldiers, closed off his heart, and accepted that he would die alone, leaving his empire to scavengers. Miles away from Vincent's opulent misery, in a dilapidated apartment complex where the radiators only hissed cold air, Beatrice Gallagher fought a very different kind of war. Bayer was a 26-year-old single mother, heavily burdened by the crushing weight of poverty and the harsh judgments of a superficial world. Standing 5'5" and weighing over 250 pounds, Bayer was constantly reminded by society that she did not fit the mold. Her days were spent wearing a stained apron at a greasy spoon diner. Her nights spent soothing her 5-year-old son, Tommy, who suffered from severe asthma and a congenital heart murmur that required medications she could scarcely afford. Bee's softness, her thick thighs, her round stomach, her soft dimpled arms, was often the subject of cruel mockery. But to Tommy, she was the safest, warmest place on earth. She absorbed the world's cruelty, so her son wouldn't have to. However, love alone could not pay the rent, nor could it erase the catastrophic mistakes of her past. Her ex-boyfriend, Ricky Miller, was a cowardly grifter with a severe gambling addiction. 2 months ago, Ricky vanished into the night, leaving behind an empty closet and a staggering $50,000 debt owed directly to the Rossi Syndicate's loan sharks. The deadline for Ricky's debt fell on a miserable, sleet-filled Tuesday. Bee was wiping down a sticky vinyl booth when the diner's bell chimed. 3 men in immaculate, dark, tailored suits stepped out of the Chicago blizzard. The air in the diner instantly dropped 10 degrees. The leader, a scarred enforcer named Carmine, walked straight up to Bee. He didn't order coffee. He slammed a heavy, manicured hand down on her rag, trapping her fingers beneath his knuckles. Carmine informed her that Ricky's debt was now her debt. If she didn't produce $50,000 by the end of the week, they would start taking their payment in flesh and they would not start with her. They would start with the boy. Panic, raw and absolute, seized Bee's chest. The threat against her own life was meaningless, but the threat against Tommy ignited a primal, ferocious fire within her. She knew going to the police was a death sentence. The Rossi syndicate owned the precincts on the south side. There was only one impossible, terrifying option. She had to go directly to the head of the snake. She had to beg the Iron Butcher for mercy. That evening, after leaving Tommy with a trusted elderly neighbor, Bear spent her last few dollars on a cab to Lake Forest. She stood before the imposing iron gates of the Rossi estate, her oversized, threadbare winter coat doing nothing to stop the biting wind from chilling her to the bone. The security guards, amused by the sight of a poor, fat woman demanding an audience with the most dangerous man in Illinois, were prepared to throw her out into the snow. But Bee did not back down. She screamed that she was there about Ricky Miller's debt, that she had a proposition, and that she would freeze to death on their driveway before she left. Her sheer desperation caught the attention of the estate's security cameras. Intrigued by the anomaly, Vincent Rossi, watching from his mahogany-paneled office, pressed a button on his intercom. "Bring her in," Vincent's voice echoed through the cold night, sharp and devoid of emotion. Bea was patted down and marched through hallways adorned with Renaissance art and crystal chandeliers. Her worn boots squeaked against the polished marble floors, a stark contrast to the silent, predatory grace of the armed men flanking her. She felt enormous, out of place, a glaring blemish in a world of perfection and wealth. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs as the heavy oak doors to Vincent's office swung open. The room smelled of expensive scotch and burning cedar. Behind a massive desk sat Vincent Rossi. He had dark, piercing eyes that seemed to strip away her defenses, a sharp jawline dusted with stubble, and an aura of immense, quiet violence. Vincent looked at the shivering, overweight woman standing on his Persian rug. He expected her to collapse, to weep, to beg for her life. Instead, Beatrice Gallagher pulled her shoulders back, raised her chin, and met the eyes of the devil without blinking. The silence in the office was suffocating, thick with the unsaid tension of two entirely different worlds colliding. Vincent leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers as his dark eyes meticulously assessed the woman before him. Beatrice Gallagher was not the type of woman who usually graced his mansion. The women in his orbit were curated, surgically enhanced, starving themselves to fit into designer gowns, fragile porcelain dolls with hollow ambitions. Bee, however, was undeniably real. She was heavy, her cheeks flushed red from the freezing wind, her hair a messy tangle escaping a cheap-knit cap. Yet beneath her worn exterior, Vincent saw a fierce, maternal defiance that fascinated him. She took up space, unapologetically planted on his floor, anchored by a desperate love for a child. "Ricky Miller owes me $50,000, Vincent stated, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. "Carmine tells me Ricky is gone, which means the debt defaults to you, Miss Gallagher. I am not a charity. I am a businessman. How do you intend to pay for a man's mistakes?" "I don't have $50,000, Bee said, her voice shaking slightly before she steadied it. "I don't even have $50 to my name. But I am a hard worker. I can cook, I can clean, I can scrub these marble floors until my hands bleed. I'll work off the debt for the rest of my life if I have to. Just please, Don't touch my son. Tommy has a bad heart. He's innocent. Kill me, enslave me, whatever you want. But leave my boy alone." Vincent stared at her, the gears of his calculating mind turning rapidly. He had no use for another maid, nor did he find joy in terrorizing a helpless mother. But Bee's mention of her son sparked a sudden, brilliant, and deeply twisted idea. In 2 weeks, the National Commission was holding a summit. Vincent's rivals were actively campaigning to strip him of his territory, arguing that his inability to produce an heir made his empire unstable. A boss without a family was a rogue element, a loose cannon. They demanded he settle down, present a family image, or step aside. He couldn't buy a Mafia bride, and he couldn't father a child. But here, standing in his office, was a ready-made family. A woman whose profound desperation meant she could be controlled, and a young boy who could be molded, claimed, and presented to the commission as an adopted heir. "I don't want you scrubbing my floors, Beatrice," Vincent said slowly, rising from his chair. He walked around the desk, his imposing height towering over her. "I have a different proposition, one that will erase your debt entirely and secure the best medical care money can buy for your son's heart." Bee held her breath, her eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. "Anything." "You will marry me," Vincent declared, the words hanging in the air like a dropped guillotine. Bee physically recoiled, her mouth opening in shock. "Marry you? I don't understand." "Look at me, Mr. Rossi. I am a fat, broke waitress from the South Side. Why on earth would you want me as a wife?" "Because you are exactly what I need," Vincent replied coldly, circling her like a predator inspecting its claim. "My world requires an image I cannot currently project. I need a wife. I need a son. I cannot have children of my own, a fact my enemies are trying to use to dismantle my empire. If you marry me, Tommy becomes my legally adopted son. He becomes a Rossi. In exchange, I will clear the 50,000. I will move you both into this estate. I will hire top pediatric cardiologists for Tommy. You will never want for food, clothing, or shelter again." "And what do you expect from me, behind closed doors?" Bee asked, her voice dropping to an anxious whisper, her hands instinctively wrapping around her stomach, self-conscious of her size under his intense gaze. "Loyalty," Vincent answered simply. "You will stand by my side at public events. You will smile for the cameras. You will play the part of a devoted wife. In private, we will live our separate lives. You will be safe under my roof. But make no mistake, Beatrice, this is a contract. If you betray me, or try to run away with the boy once his heart is fixed, the debt will be reinstated, and the consequences will be severe." The sheer madness of the offer spun around Bee's exhausted mind. Marry a mob boss? Move into a den of criminals? It was insane. But the memory of Tommy struggling to breathe that morning, his little chest heaving as his faulty heart worked overtime, shattered any hesitation. She would walk into hell and marry the devil himself if it meant Tommy would live. "I accept," she said, her voice resolute. Within 48 hours, Bee's entire reality was upended. Vincent moved swiftly, his lawyers drawing up airtight marriage and adoption papers. A private courthouse ceremony, devoid of flowers or affection, bound the cruel Mafia boss to the impoverished, plus-size mother. That evening, a fleet of black SUVs arrived at Bee's crumbling apartment to collect her and a bewildered Tommy. As they pulled up to the Lake Forest estate, Tommy pressed his face against the tinted glass, his eyes wide with wonder. "Are we going to live in a castle, Mummy?" "Yes, baby," Bea whispered, hugging him tightly, her heart pounding with dread as she looked at the imposing stone walls. "We're going to be safe now." Vincent stood in the grand foyer waiting for them. When Tommy nervously stepped through the massive doors, clutching a ragged stuffed bear, the ruthless iron butcher knelt down on the hard marble floor, so he was eye level with the boy. Bea tensed, ready to throw herself between them, but Vincent simply extended a large, scarred hand. "Welcome home, Tommy," Vincent said, his voice surprisingly gentle, as Bea watched the feared Mafia boss carefully shake her fragile son's hand. A sudden, terrifying realization washed over her. Vincent Rossi was a monster to the outside world, but as she looked at the hidden softness in his eyes when he looked at Tommy, she knew this twisted bargain was going to be infinitely more complicated than a simple business contract. The transition from a freezing, dilapidated apartment on the south side to the sprawling, hyper-secure Rossi estate in Lake Forest was a dizzying culture shock for Beatrice Gallagher. Her new reality was dictated by silk sheets, private chefs, and heavily armed men patrolling the manicured gardens. True to his word, Vincent wasted no time fulfilling his end of their dark bargain. Within 3 days of their courthouse wedding, Tommy was admitted to the prestigious Anne and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. Under the direct supervision of Dr. Harrison Caldwell, one of the nation's leading pediatric cardiologists, Tommy underwent a successful, state-of-the-art procedure to repair his congenital heart murmur. Vincent paid the staggering 7-figure medical bill in cash, demanding nothing less than absolute perfection from the hospital staff. For the first time in his 5 years of life, Tommy could run across the mansion's expansive lawns without gasping for air, his cheeks flushed with a healthy, vibrant pink rather than a sickly pale hue. Seeing her son thrive cracked the protective, hardened shell Bea had built around her own heart. She had expected her new husband to be a tyrant at home, ignoring them unless they were needed for a photo opportunity. Instead, a strange, quiet domesticity began to settle over the estate. Vincent, a man who spent his days orchestrating illegal gambling rings and territorial expansions, would return home in the evenings and sit in the grand library, reading aloud to Tommy. He never raised his voice at the boy. He bought Tommy a custom-made electric toy car, walking alongside him in the driveway with a soft, unguarded expression that completely contradicted his terrifying moniker as the Iron Butcher. However, Bea's own relationship with Vincent remained complex, simmering with an unspoken, heavy tension. She felt acutely out of place in his world. The Mafia wives who occasionally visited the estate for formal luncheons were entirely different species of women. They were razor-thin, lifted and tucked by expensive plastic surgeons, draped in Chanel and dripping in blood diamonds. When Bea walked into the room, carrying her 250 pounds with quiet dignity, their sneers were palpable. They whispered about her broad hips, her soft stomach, and her cheap, unrefined origins. One evening, ahead of the highly anticipated National Commission Summit at the Drake Hotel on the Magnificent Mile, Bea stood in her extravagant walk-in closet, on the verge of tears. Every designer gown Vincent's stylists had sent over was either too tight, too revealing, or made her look like a stuffed sausage. She was yanking the zipper of a dark velvet dress when Vincent unexpectedly stepped into the room. He paused, his dark eyes taking in the sight of her flushed, frustrated face, and the beautiful thick curves she was trying so desperately to hide. He dismissed the hovering tailors with a sharp flick of his wrist. Slowly, he approached her, his large hands gently brushing hers away from the stuck zipper. "You are suffocating yourself, Beatrice," Vincent murmured, his baritone voice sending a sudden, unexpected shiver down her spine. "I don't fit in your world, Vincent," she choked out, hot tears stinging her eyes. "Look at me. When we walk into that ballroom tomorrow, your enemies aren't going to see a powerful boss with a beautiful wife. They are going to see a fat waitress who doesn't belong. They will laugh at you." Vincent's jaw clenched, a muscle feathering in his cheek. He turned her around to face the floor-to-ceiling mirror, standing closely behind her. "Let them look," he whispered fiercely, his hands resting firmly on her wide waist. "For 5 years, I have been surrounded by shallow, empty women who wanted my money and my name. They are starving ghosts. But you are real. You fought a cartel of loan sharks to save your boy. You stepped into the devil's house and demanded a deal. That takes a kind of strength those women will never possess." He leaned in, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. "You are my wife. You are the mother of my heir. Wear something that fits the queen you are, not the ghost they expect." The next night at the Drake Hotel, Bea did not hide. She wore a custom, deep emerald gown that hugged her heavy curves, her hair swept up in an elegant twist. When she entered the glittering chandelier-lit ballroom on Vincent's arm, the room fell into a stunned silence. She was not the standard Mafia bride, but the lethal, possessive way Vincent hovered near her made it clear that disrespecting her meant death. The summit was a tense affair, designed to evaluate the stability of the Chicago syndicate. Victor Romano, a ruthless rival boss from the New York families, had been the loudest voice demanding Vincent's removal. Romano, a man with a penchant for cruelty and cheap insults, cornered Vincent and Bea near the ice sculptures. "Rossi," Romano sneered, his eyes raking over Bea with overt theatrical disgust. "I see you finally found a woman desperate enough to overlook your medical shortcomings. Tell me, did you buy her by the pound? Or did you just empty out a local soup kitchen to find a mother for that bastard kid of hers?" The music in the ballroom seemed to stop. The surrounding mobsters held their breath, waiting for the explosion. Bea's face drained of color, her old insecurities screaming at her to run and hide. But Vincent did not yell. He didn't even blink. He calmly handed his champagne flute to a passing waiter. In one fluid, blindingly fast motion, Vincent grabbed a heavy silver ice tong from the buffet table and slammed it brutally down onto Romano's left hand, pinning it to the mahogany table. Romano shrieked in agony as bones fractured. "My wife," Vincent said softly, the lethal calm in his voice echoing louder than a gunshot, "is the beating heart of my empire, and my son is a Rossi. If you ever speak of my family with anything less than absolute reverence again, Victor, I will not stop at your hand. I will take your tongue, your territory, and your life. Am I understood?" Romano, pale and gasping for breath, nodded frantically. Vincent pulled a crisp linen handkerchief from his pocket, wiped his hands, and offered his arm back to Bea. "Shall we dance, my love?" he asked smoothly, leaving the crippled rival boss bleeding on the ice. As Vincent led her to the dance floor, Bea realized the terrifying truth. He wasn't just for the commission. The fierce, possessive fire in his eyes was terrifyingly real. But their triumph at the Drake was merely the calm before a devastating storm. because lurking in the shadows of the hotel alleyway, nursing a gambling debt and a festering hatred, was Ricky Miller. And Ricky had just watched the entire altercation, realizing that Victor Romano would pay a fortune to hit Vincent Rossi where it truly hurt. The days following the summit at the Drake Hotel were deceptively peaceful. Vincent's public defense of Bear had solidified his standing with the National Commission. No one dared question his ability to lead, nor did they mention his infertility again. The adoption papers were legally sealed. Tommy was officially a Rossi, protected by the full, terrifying weight of the Chicago syndicate. For the first time in her life, Bea felt safe. She began to let her guard down, allowing herself to enjoy the quiet moments with Vincent, the lingering touches when they passed in the hallway, the way his dark eyes tracked her curves with genuine, unmistakable hunger, and the deep, rumbling laughter he only shared with Tommy. But safety is an illusion in the Mafia underworld. Victor Romano, humiliated and nursing a shattered hand, was not a man to forgive and forget. He couldn't attack Vincent directly without starting an all-out mob war that the Commission would punish. Instead, he sought a rat. He found Ricky Miller, a cowardly opportunist, hiding in a squalid motel on the outskirts of Gary, Indiana. Romano offered Ricky $2 million and a new identity in exchange for one simple task: bypass the Rossi estate security, which Ricky could do using old passwords Bea had once used for her bank accounts, and kidnap Tommy. Taking the boy would shatter Vincent's newly minted family man image and destroy Bea, leaving Vincent vulnerable and broken. It happened on a Tuesday night. A violent thunderstorm was battering Lake Forest, the heavy rain masking the sound of approaching footsteps. Vincent was downtown, dealing with a shipment delay at the docks, leaving the estate guarded by his night crew. Ricky, armed with Romano's inside intel and 3 heavily armed mercenaries, managed to slip through the estate's rear service entrance, disabling the perimeter alarms during a localized power flicker caused by the lightning. Bea was in the kitchen, wearing oversized sweatpants and a loose t-shirt, heating up a glass of milk for Tommy, who was having trouble sleeping due to the thunder. The sudden, unnatural silence of the house was her first warning. The rhythmic pacing of the guards outside the kitchen door had ceased. The heavy oak door kicked open. Ricky stepped inside, his clothes soaked from the rain, a manic, desperate gleam in his eyes. He was holding a suppressed pistol, and the 3 mercenaries fanned out behind him. "Hello, Bea," Ricky sneered, shaking the water from his hair. "You're looking a little too comfortable for a waitress who used to scrape my boots. Where's the kid?" Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded Bea's veins. This was the man who had abandoned them, left them to the lone sharks, and now he was here to steal the son he never cared for. All of Bea's insecurities about her size, her worth, and her past vanished, replaced by the primal, terrifying rage of a mother protecting her child. "You are not touching him, Ricky," Bea said, her voice eerily calm as her hand subtly drifted behind the kitchen island toward a heavy, cast-iron skillet resting on the stove. "Don't play hero, fatty," Ricky laughed, stepping forward. "Romano just wants the kid. You give him to me, and maybe I don't put a bullet in your knee." Ricky lunged toward the hallway leading to Tommy's bedroom. He underestimated her entirely. He expected the timid, beaten-down woman he had left behind. But Bea was fighting for her child's life. With surprising speed and the full force of her weight, Bea swung the heavy cast-iron skillet. It connected sickeningly with the side of Ricky's head. He crumpled to the floor instantly, his gun clattering across the imported Italian tiles. The mercenaries raised their weapons, but before a single shot could be fired, the front doors of the estate blew open. The storm raged into the foyer, and out of the darkness stepped Vincent Rossi. He had been tipped off by a loyal informant about Romano's meeting with Ricky just minutes too late, and he had driven his armored SUV at 100 miles an hour through the blinding rain to get home. The Iron Butcher had arrived, and he brought hell with him. What followed was not a fight. It was a slaughter. Vincent and his men descended upon the intruders with surgical, ruthless precision. The gunfight lasted less than 30 seconds. When the smoke cleared and the deafening echoes faded, the mercenaries lay dead. Ricky, groaning and bleeding from his head wound, was dragged by his collar and thrown violently at Vincent's feet. Vincent's chest heaved, his tailored suit ruined by the rain, his eyes completely black with murderous fury. He aimed his weapon directly at Ricky's skull, but before he pulled the trigger, he looked up and saw Bea. She was trembling, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, her arms wrapped fiercely around Tommy, shielding the boy's eyes from the carnage. Vincent lowered his gun. He wouldn't execute a man in front of his son. He signaled his men, who silently dragged a weeping Ricky out into the stormy night. Ricky Miller would never be seen again. Vincent dropped his weapon and crossed the room. He fell to his knees in the blood-stained foyer, wrapping his massive arms around both Bea and Tommy. He buried his face in Bea's soft stomach, his broad shoulders shaking with a terrifying, overwhelming relief. "I've got you," Vincent whispered, his voice cracking, shedding the monster and revealing the man underneath. "I will never let anything hurt you. Ever." Hours later, after the bodies were cleared and Tommy was safely asleep, Vincent and Bea sat on the edge of their massive bed. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a raw, vulnerable truth in its wake. "I married you for an image," Vincent confessed, looking down at his scarred hands. "I thought my infertility made me half a man. I thought I needed a fake family to keep my throne. But tonight, when I realized you were in danger, I didn't care about the commission. I didn't care about the empire. I only cared about you, Beatrice. I love you. I love every soft curve of your body, and I love the fierce, beautiful heart that fought for our son." Bea reached out, her hands gently cupping his face, pulling his eyes up to meet hers for the first time in her life. She didn't feel fat, or poor, or unworthy. She felt like a queen. "We aren't a fake family anymore, Vincent," she whispered, kissing him deeply, tasting the rain and the promise of forever on his lips. "You are Tommy's father, and you are my husband." In the end, the cruel and infertile Mafia boss didn't just find an heir to secure his brutal empire. He found a love that healed his broken soul. Beatrice, the desperate single mother society looked down upon, proved that true strength doesn't come from a size tag, but from a mother's fierce, unwavering heart. If you loved this dramatic tale of sacrifice, mafia revenge and true romance, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends. Drop a comment below on what you think Vincent did to Victor Romano, and hit the bell icon so you never miss our next gripping story.